Hey Virgo, some things grow in the dark, not because they're hidden out of shame or fear alone, but because the growing itself requires a certain kind of quiet, a certain absence of scrutiny, a space where something can develop at its own pace without being examined before it's ready to be examined. There are feelings like that, feelings that needed time to know themselves before they could be offered. And if someone has been quietly knowing something about you for longer than you realized, in a way that has outlasted every reason to abandon it, then maybe what they've been growing in the dark is more real than most things that announce themselves immediately. There's someone who has been loving you for a while, not recently arrived at it, not in the early uncertain phase where a feeling is still deciding what it is. Past that, in the place where something has had enough time to know itself fully, to move through all the stages of being questioned and rationalized and almost released, and then returning stubbornly to the same conclusion, the conclusion that what they feel is real, that it has been real, that it continues to be real, regardless of how many times they've tried to convince themselves otherwise. And there's a gap between you in age, in where you each are in the particular timeline of a life. In the specific world, each of you inhabits the references, the history, the particular relationship with time that shifts at different stages of a life. And that gap has been part of why the secret exists, part of what has made this feeling something to be carried quietly rather than offered openly. Part of the weight that sits alongside the love itself, the awareness that what they feel exists in territory that the world has opinions about, that the gap visible to others invites a particular kind of judgment that the love itself doesn't. But the gap hasn't changed the feeling. That's the thing worth sitting with first. Because feelings that are circumstantial feelings, that are products of proximity or novelty or the specific context of a particular moment, those get changed by distance, by time, by the introduction of complications. They fade when the circumstances shift. They resolve when the novelty passes. They turn out, with enough time, to have been something smaller than they seemed. But this one hasn't done that. It has been a while. That's the specific, significant, quietly enormous detail that changes what this is. A while means it has survived things, has survived the introduction of complications, has survived the periods of distance, has survived the moments where they almost talked themselves out of it, where they had every rational reason to conclude that this particular feeling for this particular person with this particular gap between you was simply not something they were going to allow themselves to continue with. And it returned every time, not as obsession, not as something they chose to feed or cultivate, just there in the quiet moments, in the specific texture of certain thoughts that led, without deciding to, back to you. That persistence, the specific quality of a feeling that survives its own resistance, is one of the most reliable signals available about the nature of that feeling. Small things don't persist like that. Convenient things don't persist like that. Things built on surface qualities, on appearance, on circumstance, on the particular appeal of novelty, don't outlast the sustained campaign of reason and distance and the genuine desire to be free of them. Only things that are genuinely real, genuinely rooted in something that exists independent of the circumstances, keep returning after every attempt to release them. This has been returning for a while, and that tells you something about what it is. Now, the gap. Let's sit with it directly rather than moving past it too quickly. Because it's part of the reality of this, not the most important part, but a real part, and examining what the gap actually does to a connection, rather than what we assume it does, changes the picture considerably. An age gap creates different worlds, different relationships with time. One person for whom certain things are still forming, still possible, still ahead. Another for whom certain things have already been lived, already been learned, already been integrated into how they move through existence. And that difference, that specific asymmetry in where each person is in the particular unfolding of a life, is usually what people focus on when they think about why gaps are complicated. The different references, the different stages, the different relationship to what's possible and what's already behind. But here's what the gap also does that rarely gets acknowledged. It creates a different kind of seeing. The person on one side of the gap, regardless of which side, regardless of who is older, approaches the other without the specific blindness that comes from shared reference points. Without the particular myopia of looking at someone through the lens of the same generational assumptions, the same cultural saturation, the same accumulated familiarity with the type that makes people from the same era somewhat invisible to each other in a specific way. The gap creates fresh eyes, the kind that see what's actually there rather than what's expected to be there. That notice things the people closest to you, the ones for whom you've become familiar, categorized, known in the specific way that breeds a particular kind of blindness, have stopped seeing. That encounter you without the overlay of expectation and find in what they actually encounter something that affects them in ways they weren't anticipating. And this person, the one who has been loving you secretly with this gap between you for longer than you knew, has been seeing you with those eyes, the uncategorized ones, the ones that didn't approach you with a predetermined sense of what you'd be, that encountered the actual texture of who you are, your specific intelligence, your particular way of moving through situations, the specific quality of your presence in rooms, the things that are genuinely, distinctively yours, rather than products of a generational type and were affected specifically in ways that have accumulated over time into something they can no longer describe as casual. They've been paying attention. That's what a while of secretly loving someone involves. An extended period of paying a particular kind of attention, specific, close, building in its understanding to someone who doesn't know they're being watched that carefully. And what that attention has built is a knowledge of you that is, in certain ways, in the ways that come from sustained observation rather than from direct conversation, more complete than what people who know you more overtly might have, because they've been watching the unguarded moments. The moments when you're just being rather than presenting. And what they've found there in the unguarded version is what has kept them returning to the same conclusion. Now, here's the part about the shame, about the social weight that has been part of what maintains the secret alongside the personal fear. Because this isn't just about whether you'd receive the feeling the same way, though that's part of it. It's about the awareness that this love exists in a category that invites external commentary, that the gap visible to others in a way that the interior quality of the feeling is not, opens the door to a particular kind of judgment that neither of you invited, but that both of you would have to navigate if this stopped being secret. And that social weight, the awareness of other people's opinions about what the gap means, about what motivates love with a gap, about whether something real can exist across that particular kind of distance, has been part of what this person has been carrying alongside the love itself. Not just the fear of your personal response, the fear of everything that becomes visible once something private becomes public, of having something genuine subjected to the reductive analysis of people who will evaluate it primarily through the lens of the gap rather than through the lens of what's actually between you. That's a significant thing to carry. The combination of a large, real, sustained feeling and the awareness that expressing it requires navigating not just your response, but the world's response. That coming forward means offering something enormous and simultaneously bracing for it to be evaluated by people who weren't there for any of the moments that built it. Who will see the category gap relationship and apply the assumptions of that category without access to any of the specific, accumulated, particular reality of what this is? And some people, when they feel something enormous but anticipate the cost of expressing it, choose the secret indefinitely, because the secret at least preserves the feeling in its pure form, keeps it from being subjected to the reduction of external judgment, keeps the version where it's simply what it is, real, specific, theirs, intact, even if that version can only exist in the interior. But you said it, they've been loving you for a while, and a while has its own pressure. Because carrying something of this size in silence over an extended period produces a specific kind of exhaustion that eventually becomes unsustainable. The love doesn't diminish, that's the thing. The feeling doesn't decrease with the carrying. But the capacity to maintain the silence around it, the containment, the performance of ordinary interaction in your presence when what's happening internally is anything but ordinary, that has limits, that erodes, that reaches eventually the point where something has to give, and what gives isn't the love, what gives is the secret. Not necessarily in a dramatic way, not necessarily in the form of a declaration that names everything directly, but in the small fissures that appear when containment has been maintained past its capacity. In the moment where a glance holds slightly longer than it should, in the specific way they respond to something you say that reveals they've been thinking about you more than casual interaction would explain. in the quality of care they bring to small things involving you that is disproportionate to what the surface of your relationship would account for. In the moment where something true shows through clearly, briefly, undeniably before it's pulled back, and when that fissure comes, when something of what they've been carrying becomes briefly, partially visible, the question that will exist in the space between you won't be what you should do about it. It will be something more fundamental about what you believe is possible for you, about the forms love is allowed to take in your life, about whether you're the kind of person who can receive something real even when it arrives in a form that doesn't match what you expected, even when it comes with complications, even when it exists in a category that the world has predetermined opinions about. Because love with a gap, real love, the kind that has been building in someone for a while through the specific accumulation of paying close attention to who you actually are, doesn't feel different on the inside from love without one. The gap is visible from the outside. From the outside, it's the first thing people see, the thing that organizes their interpretation of everything else. But from the inside, from within the actual experience of two people being affected by each other in genuine ways, the gap is just one of many things, one of many differences. One of many things that would need to be navigated if this became something navigated together. And people navigate things all the time. People navigate differences of every kind in background, in temperament, in experience, in values, in the particular shape of the histories they carry. The question isn't whether the gap creates differences, of course it does. The question is whether what exists between you is real enough, specific enough, genuinely grounded enough in who you actually are to each other to be worth the navigation. Uh, and the duration, the fact that this has been going on for a while, that this feeling has survived its own resistance, and the social weight and the practical complications and the sustained campaign of reason suggests that on one side of this, at least, the answer to that question has already been decided. Not easily, not without the full awareness of what it would cost, but decided that what exists here is worth it. That you specifically, particularly, as the person you are when you're not performing anything, are worth it. Now comes the question of your side, which is harder to answer because you didn't know until recently that there was a question, because the feeling has been secret, because you've been on the outside of something that exists entirely on the inside of someone else, sensing maybe that something was there, but without the full picture of what it was or how long it had been building. But you have a sense now of the shape of it, of the particular person it might be, of the specific quality of certain interactions that have had a texture you've been trying not to examine too directly, because examining it would require naming something that the gap makes complicated to name. And in that not quite examining, not quite naming space, you've been protecting yourself from having to decide what you think about it, what you feel about it, what you're willing to let it be. That protection has made sense. You didn't have enough information to do anything other than protect until you did. But now, in this moment, with this particular quality of honest attention, the information is here. The person who has been loving you secretly with this gap between you for longer than you knew is real. What they feel is real. The duration of it is real. The specific, particular, close attention paying quality of it is real. And the question, the honest, private, body level question, is what you do with that reality. Not what you should do according to any external standard, what you actually feel, what you actually want. Whether there's something in you, in the part of you, that registered the quality of those interactions, that noticed the particular texture of the attention, that filed things about this person without quite deciding to, that has been building its own version of something in response to what they've been building in secret. You don't have to know the answer immediately. You don't have to decide anything tonight. But you do have to ask. Honestly, in the private space where real things get asked, whether what you've been sensing has a response in you that the protection has been managing away before it could be fully felt. Because if it does, if there's something there that has been quietly accumulating in the unexamined space, then this isn't just their story, it's also yours. And the two stories, kept in their separate silences for all this time, might be closer to the same story than either of you has allowed yourself to know. And love that has been building on both sides. Quietly, separately, in parallel silences, is the kind that tends to be real. Not convenient, not uncomplicated. Not without the gap and everything the gap means, and everything navigating it would require, but real in the specific, durable, outlasts its own resistance way. That real things are real. And real things, however complicated their form, however much they exist in categories, the world has opinions about, deserve to be received. Honestly, without the protection intercepting them before they can fully land, without the category deciding the value before the actual thing has been allowed to speak. Let it speak. When the moment comes, when the fissure appears, when something that has been secret for a while finally shows through, let it speak. And listen with the honest, undefended, actually hear part of you to what it says. Because something real has been waiting for a while for exactly that. For you to be still enough, present enough, open enough to hear it.